Hey, if you just clicked on this video, do not touch that back button, because what you are about to hear is going to stop you in your tracks, whether you are washing dishes, driving home, sitting in a waiting room, or lying in bed at the end of a long day. Because this is one of those stories that reminds you why you should never, ever judge a book by its cover. His name was Marcus Cole, and on the morning that would change everything, he was standing in the parking lot of the Thornfield Financial Tower in downtown Chicago, wearing a jacket that was one size too big and boots that had seen better days. A 38-year-old single father with a 7-year-old daughter named Lily, who had asthma and a smile that could light up a room the size of a stadium, a beat-up 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked rear bumper, a folder full of certifications, and a note on the kitchen counter that read, "Daddy's going to make things better. I love you to the moon." There were 42 men trying out that day for the position of Chief Personal Security Officer for Nathaniel Voss, a CEO worth north of $900 million, and the other men were former Navy SEALs and ex-Secret Service agents who wore expensive tactical gear and moved with the contained energy of men who had done this before. And then there was Marcus, who sat alone near the window while a man named Derek Sloan looked him up and down and said, just loud enough to be heard, "Are you sure you're in the right room? This is for executive protection, not mall security." And Marcus turned his head slowly and said, with absolute evenness, "I'm sure," and then turned back to the wall. Because Marcus Cole had spent 12 years in the United States Army, 3 deployments to Afghanistan, specialized training in personal security detail work, 8 years of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and 5 years of raising his daughter alone after his wife, Renee, died of a sudden cardiac event at 31 years old. And that kind of life does not produce a man who flinches at a waiting room. When the obstacle course began, Marcus moved through it like water finding the fastest path downhill. Not flashy, not performative, just ruthlessly efficient with no wasted motion anywhere. And when his time appeared on the board, 9 minutes and 58 seconds, decision accuracy 100%, faster than Derek Sloan, faster than nearly everyone. The room went quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when they have been wrong about something and know it. In the combat assessment room, the evaluator, Thomas Crane, a former MMA professional who had seen everything and was impressed by very little, found in Marcus something he had not found in any of the other 11 candidates that day. An absolute granite stillness at the center of his response to pressure. And when they were done, Crane said quietly, "Whatever happens today, don't stop doing this. You have something that doesn't come from training." And Marcus paused at the door and said, "I have a daughter. She makes me want to be worth something." Marcus finished third on the combined scoring list, advanced to the interview, and when Diane Forsyth, 20 years in corporate security consulting, a woman who had interviewed hundreds of candidates and was impressed by very few, asked him what he thought about on the obstacle course, he said, "My daughter, and the note I left her this morning." And when she asked what the note said, he said that I was going to make things better. And when she asked why he wanted this job, he said, "Because Lily deserves a father who isn't one bad month away from not being able to afford her inhaler." And before he left, he turned at the door and said, "Whatever you decide, thank you for the fair shot." And she said, "I gave everyone the same shot, Mr. Cole." And he said, "I know. That's what I'm thanking you for." And she sat alone in the conference room after he left, and then picked up her phone and dialed. Before the call came, Marcus drove the 2 hours home with the radio off, and stopped at a gas station and stood at the pump in the cold Chicago air, and let himself feel for just a moment all the things he had been holding at arm's length all day. 5 years of holding everything together alone, the bone-deep, persistent tiredness of a single parent of a child with health needs, the grief of a man who had been the luckiest person in the world for 8 years, and then lost it in a hospital corridor. And then he got back in the car and drove home, and stood in his sister Gloria's doorway looking at Lily asleep on the couch with a book open on her chest. And he picked up the book, carefully so as not to lose her page, and pulled the blanket up around her shoulders and kissed her forehead and whispered, "Daddy did everything he could." 3 days later, on the morning of the 4th day, his phone rang, and it was Diane Forsyth's voice, measured and precise, and she said, after reviewing all 12 finalists across all 4 phases, "The selection committee has identified its preferred candidate, and that candidate is you." And Marcus was standing in his kitchen, with the morning light coming through the window over the sink, and he could hear Lily down the hall reading aloud, working through a word she didn't know. And he sat down slowly in the kitchen chair and said, "I'm here." And Diane said, "In 20 years of doing this work, what I look for is not the person who is most impressive in a room. It is the person who, when the room stops watching, is exactly the same as they were when everyone was looking. And I don't encounter that combination as often as I would like." And then she hung up, and Marcus put his hands over his face, the way people do when an emotion is bigger than the normal boundaries of expression, and sat like that for 20 seconds, and then took his hands away and looked out the window, and walked down the hall and knocked on Lily's door, and when she looked up from her book and said, "Daddy," he said, "Things got better." And she put the book down and held her arms out, and he crossed the room in 3 steps and picked her up, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and said, "I knew it." And he said, "Did you?" And she said, "Yes." And then she said, "I left the moon on your note. I drew a moon on the back because you said you loved me to the moon, so I left you a moon to take with you." And Marcus looked at his daughter's face and understood that every hard thing, every impossible morning, every grinding, exhausting year of holding it all together alone had been building toward exactly this moment and this face and this small, perfect act of love. And he said, "Thank you. It worked." The job turned out to be everything Marcus was built for. Advance work, route planning, threat assessment, the constant low-level attentiveness of a radar system that never fully powered down, and the granite stillness that Diane had identified and Thomas Crane had felt and Nathaniel Voss had intuited, turned out to be the defining characteristic of his professional value, because it was not a personality trait he had been born with, but a scar he wore on the inside, shaped by Kandahar province at 24, at a hospital waiting room at 33, and every pre-dawn morning since when he had woken up and chosen again to function. And in the field it made him exceptional, and 11 months in, when a threat materialized into something concrete in a parking structure in Minneapolis, and decisions had to be made in seconds that most people are never called to make in a lifetime, Marcus made every single one of them correctly, and Voss was not harmed. And that night, Marcus called Lily before her bedtime, and she said, "Hi, Daddy, I made a new word today." And he said, "Tell me." And she said, "Flumptious." It means when something is both fluffy and delicious at the same time. And he said, "That's a great word. That's a necessary word. The world needed that word." And she said, "I know. Good night, Daddy." And he said, "Good night, Moon," and lay on the hotel bed in the quiet room and was by every internal measure completely and utterly all right. The note still lives on his bedside table, folded once, slightly worn at the crease from being unfolded and refolded, and on hard nights, and there are still hard nights because life does not stop being hard once one particular thing goes right. He opens it and looks at the yellow moon, slightly imperfect, drawn by a 7-year-old who operated on the faith that things done with love find their way to where they are needed. And he thinks about everything that brought him here. And then he folds it back up and goes to sleep. Because if this story is about anything, it is about this. Every day, somewhere in the world, someone parks a beat-up car in a parking lot and takes a breath, and walks into a room where they are not expected to belong, carrying their qualifications in a folder because that is what they have, and what they have is real. And they hear the small, casual sounds of being pre-dismissed, and they have a choice, to let the room decide who they are, or to know with granite certainty that the room's opinion was formed in the absence of evidence, and the evidence is coming, So, if that is you, if you are sitting in a parking lot right now with a folder on your passenger seat and a note on a kitchen counter, and someone at home who believes you are going to make things better, then walk in with your folder and your too big jacket and your worn boots and your real hard-won qualifications and the face you have earned through everything you have survived. Because the room does not decide who you are, and you were always supposed to be in that room. So go show them. And if this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe, because we tell stories like this every single week, and you do not want to miss a single one.